Hi again then guys, and welcome to the first tune setup to be released on the channel for the new DLC pack. Of course, I have had a number of requests for tune setups, circuit setups in particular for the new cars, and as I said, I would be getting around to doing some of those. I'll probably release two of these today, maybe a Skyline later on perhaps, but for now, we're kicking it off with the FD RX-7. Now this is not a fully tuned setup, and I do get comments occasionally about balance of performance and optimizing it for different N classes and all that kind of expected stuff. So to put that to rest, you can use this for anything. You don't have to upgrade the power or lower the weight at all. That is all entirely down to you. This is more than anything else a handling and grip setup. So the power and speed is just whatever you need it to be. Now, I've dropped the weight as far as it can go, but as I said, that's kind of irrelevant. The power I've optimized for the N400 category, which I feel like probably quite a few people will use this for, but if you want to take it higher or lower, absolutely fine. Or if you want to leave it stock for balance of performance or whatever, again, absolutely fine. I've got traction control turned off because it's the quickest, but of course that's down to personal preference. Tyres we've got on Sport Softs. Obviously racing tyres are quicker, but it gives you a better idea of what it's capable of with sports tyres. Brake balance I haven't touched. As far as the suspension, we've got it 5mm higher than the absolute slammed height. Then the frequency I've changed to 2.1 front and rear. The anti-roll we've left on 7 on the front, but increased the rear to 6. You could take that a little bit higher if you want to, maybe to 7. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going too high. But as I said, if you want to try it out, there's nothing wrong with that, of course. As far as compression, we've got those on 64, rebound on 92, with neutral camber and neutral toe. Don't be afraid of camber in a car like this. If you are, say, a less experienced driver, or maybe you started playing GT Sport more recently and you haven't quite got into the feel of the handling style yet, there's nothing wrong with having camber. If you want to give it, say, 1 degree, for instance, front and rear, or even higher, but 1 degree is usually enough, then obviously feel free to do that. It's the point of the tune, to make it personalised and to make it easier to drive. Downforce I've got as high as possible. Of course, it's not that much downforce anyway, but it's down to personal preference. As far as the diff, which again is very much down to personal driving style, I've gone for halfway on initial torque. Then for acceleration and braking, I've left those basically as standard, 40 and 20. If you want to change them, by all means you can. It will always affect the handling of a rear-wheel drive car like this very substantially. So if you already know settings that you prefer, by all means go for those. But if you want to just mess around for the sake of it, at the same time, you could try that also. As far as the gearbox, of course this will depend, just like with all of my other tunes, on what level you decide to tune the car for. So if you take it lower, say N300 for instance, which is as low as it can go, then you'll want closer ratios. So say an auto setting of maybe around the 160 region or even 150. Whereas if you take it higher, up to N500 or N600, of course you want to space them out a bit more. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking them too high, because or too long in effect, because you'll find it a bit too sluggish. So overall that entirely depends on what class you're going to be running in, and as you can see I haven't adjusted the gears or the final drive at all, and that is purely to show what I mean. That's irrelevant, because that isn't the purpose of the tune. If you do want a rough idea, then basically fit this one to 180, then round off the gears if you want to, and I'd recommend keeping the final drive at 4.3, but that is just for N400, of course. So that's it for the tune. Tons of variation there. So let's actually take it out on a track to see what it can do. Now, of course, for drivers who don't have as much experience either with an RX-7 or more specifically with GT Sport, I wouldn't really recommend going straight into driving this car. Not that it's difficult to drive, but the tail-happy, slippery nature of an RX-7 does mean that you do need to have at least some experience on the game to start getting more out of the car. If you want to just dive in head first, then by all means give it a go. Some people in the comments of other videos have said that they've got stuff like the LaFerrari pretty early on in the game, and I've loved it. So, of course, no problem at all. But generally speaking, maybe if it's your first ever Gran Turismo game, for instance, which for some people it is, then you might want to try something else first, something maybe with all-wheel drive, for instance. However, this car, when tuned and when driven correctly, is a very difficult car to beat for its power level and for its, in this case, N-class level. In the N400 category, or in any category really, the rotary engine advantage that an RX-7 gives you in punching well above its power is always there. So making use of that and combining it with improvements in handling and control and grip is basically the same concept that I use and the same philosophy to tune a muscle car. Muscle cars have no trouble with straight line speed, it's the cornering that you need to improve. Likewise with an RX-7, the straight line speed is never an issue, so if you can increase the control, well then you can make it into not necessarily more of a track weapon, but an easier to use weapon. So overall, if you do decide to use it, as you can see from the lap times, it can go pretty rapidly around the track. Of course, I'm not the quickest of drivers anyway, so doubtless people could take this tune faster than I have, of course. But, to give you some idea of how quick it is, it's roughly 3 seconds slower than my fully tuned version around this same track. So given that that car has over 600 horsepower, and this one is in the N400 class, that's a pretty impressive time, I think. So overall, if you do decide to use it, I hope you have a lot of fun with it, and in whatever class you decide to use it for, I hope you win plenty of races. But that's it for this tune setup overall. If you'd like to see more for GT Sport, you can click through at the end of this video to the playlist to see those. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.